Well, today we're continuing the secret life of a Christian and talking about anger and being angry. And so I thought I'd start off with a time that Matt got angry. How would you like? So even pastors get angry. Jesus got angry. We just heard that. And pastors get angry. And I remember one particular episode, and not that, there was probably more than one in my life, right? So we decided to remodel our kitchen in our home we previously lived in. And so being the frugal guy that I am, my wife and I went into the home improvement store and found the countertop that she wanted to put in the kitchen. And so then I later got my day set aside, and I went out and I bought the countertop and I brought it home and began to set up in our front yard, because that was the door closest to the kitchen. And I set up in our front yard, and I didn't have sawhorses at the time, so I used a couple chairs off the deck chairs to kind of prop this countertop up on, and I clamped it down with the head clamps and everything. And I went in and measured once, measured twice, did all the right things, came out, cut it to the lengths, the proper lengths, put the hole for the sink in, put the holes in for all the faucets. And I had spent a few hours doing all this, and I had it all ready to go. I had everything ready. It was measured right and everything. All I had to do was carry it in the house, and lay it up there on the cabinets. That's all I had to do, right? So I went over to the countertop, and I undid the clamps, both clamps, and I took the clamps and I took a step away from the countertop to set them down. And as I did that, the whole countertop started to slide off and it fell on the ground. Now, this was the kind of countertop that was flat, and then it had a splash guard on the back. Do you know what I'm talking about? So it's flat and the splash guard goes up. Well, it fell right on the splash guard and broke the length of the countertop, the splash guard. And so I put the thing back up there, and I'm just disgusted. And pastors can't cuss, you know that, right? And so we're not allowed to do that. So the neighbors are out, the kids are out, so I just yell, And out comes my wife, and she's like, "What's the matter?" She thought I'd cut off a finger or something, and the kids had come out of the house, and I'm just disgusted looking at this countertop, and the girl's like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And my wife realizes that I'm just mad, and she says, "Go back in the house now." And they go back in, and so this is all going, and I'm just stewing. I'm just upset at this point. And finally, my wife "Can I do anything to help?" "No, you can't do anything. There's nothing you're going to do at this point." And so she kind of just says, "Okay, I need to let him cool off." So I'm standing there looking at it, and I'm thinking, can I repair it? And I figured I can't repair it. I've got to go back and buy another, so I got to spend more time and more money. I got to spend more money, more time, and I've just about had it at this point. So I take the tape measure that's in my hand, because I am going to give vent to my anger at this point. And so I take the tape measure in my hand, and the countertop's there, and I just throw it as hard as I can at the countertop. Now, you'd expect that that it would just bounce off and hit me in the head or something, right? But countertops are pretty slick surfaces. And so it didn't bounce off the countertop. The countertop became a launching pad for my tape measure. And so it hit the countertop, but then the countertop shot it off into the air it was like a projectile in the air. Now, not too far from the end of my countertop was our brand new minivan. And as it went flying in the air, it went right into our brand new minivan, into the door of our minivan. And you can actually go and see a dent in the driver's side door that is still there today from that time that I got angry. Now, I'm glad it was only a minivan. I can't imagine if my kids had been standing around as I did that and gotten hit or hurt, or someone else, or the dog. But I think about that moment where I gave vent to my anger, and that sometimes when we give vent to our anger, when we let loose our anger, damage gets done. And damage sometimes gets done not just to minivans, but to people. And then when we give full vent to our anger, which is really what we're going to talk about today, is really about us. It's our anger. It's about us, that we hurt those around us, and other people around us are affected by that. And so we need to understand, I think, today about anger and how we get angry, so that we can understand how we can not do that often. And so we want to look at how we get angry this morning. So understanding our anger. I found a quote from a book called Search for Significance And in it, Robert McGee says this: life is distorted by our own expectations of what we are going to experience. Let me read that again. Life is distorted by our own expectations of what we are going to experience. And if we think about most of the times that we get angry and frustrated, it's about some unmet expectation, isn't it? That we have an expectation for the world or our life or something going on, and when that expectation goes unmet, that's when we get frustrated. That's when we get angry. That's when we get upset. It's because something that we've expected isn't happening, and so we say things like, well, that should be doing this, or they ought to do this. Anytime we're saying a should or a ought, it's about an expectation we have about the world or about life, that we think things ought to be a certain way, and when they're not, we get frustrated. We get angry. So to unpack this a little bit, hopefully Larry can help me and pull up this one slide that talks about the process that goes on inside of us, that we all have beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and then that leads to action. And so we all have beliefs. Those are the oughts and the shoulds in our thought system, that we think things ought to be this way or things should be this way. And so our beliefs are a part of that. And then based on those beliefs, we actually have thoughts, and we evaluate the world around us or situations or people or anything. Based on our beliefs, we have thoughts. And really, those beliefs and thoughts are what lead to the emotions that we have. And so if I feel anger, it's because I've had a belief or an expectation that didn't get met, and I had some thoughts about that, and so now I'm angry about it. And this all sometimes happens rather quickly. And then if I'm angry enough, I'm going to act out, or I'm going to behave a certain way based on that emotion. And emotions are very powerful and strong things within us. So let's take an example. I'm going to share an example this morning that Van Beal gave me this week. Wake up. Stay like that. He was right. All right, good. So Van came in to men's group this Tuesday morning, and he wasn't, I don't say he was angry or bitter or anything, but he was rattled because he had just had somebody who was angry at him in their car. He had experienced road rage, and we were talking about that. So let's unpack. How many people have also experienced road rage out there? You know, you've either been the victim of it or you've been the perpetrator of road rage, right? Or how many people, let's put it this way, how many of us have ever been angry in our cars? Well, can I get an amen or a confession this morning? All right, good. So let's walk this through. So we might have a typical belief. If you're driving to work on Monday morning, your typical belief is that I should be at work on time. So that's an expectation, right? And so I'm expecting to be at work on time. I've planned out my day. I've gotten up on time, and I'm driving to work, right? And what road do you all typically get stuck on when you're driving? Call out a road. Van, what road were you on the other day when that happened? Snowden. Okay, so you're on Snowden, or you're on Snow River Parkway, and let's say you're trying to get to men's breakfast, you're trying to get to work on time, and all of a sudden there's an accident, or there's something going on, or the police pulled over people, and so everything's slowed down. Now, you're now thinking to yourself, oh, now what am I going to do? I'm not going to be on time. Now, if I am running late, how does that strengthen that emotion? Does that make sense? So if I'm already running late, how much more angry am I now getting? You see how that makes a factor too? So I think that, and then I'm now becoming frustrated. And I'm becoming angry because I'm not going to get to work on time, and these other people are in my way. And so then my actions become, what Van experienced was somebody who took it out on him and did a lot of crazy things. But what do we do when we're in that situation, when we become angry at the church? So what do we do? Anybody want to confess this morning what we do? We blow the horn. What else do we do? I'm just trying to keep you guys awake this morning. So, what's that? I heard somebody. Come on, Liz. Mark said it. Oh, yeah. Give it a hard. He waves like, is it like this? Or is it like, see ya, have a good day? Which one is it? All right, so I know what I do. I go, come on, get out of the way, come on. And so we get frustrated, we act out, and it becomes our behavior. So our emotions lead to this behavior. So I want to think about that. So here's what I want to suggest. There are also other people in other cars who are not getting angry. Now, so that says something, doesn't it? That says something because other people can be in the exact same situation as we are and not be angry. So is it the situation that causes the anger, or is it something going on inside of us? I want to suggest to you this morning that not all anger, but a lot of our anger and frustration is really about us. It's our anger. It's something that we believe, something that we've thought about. It's our emotion based on those beliefs and thoughts. And some of us just we act out differently and behave differently when we're angry. Some of us throw tape measures. Some of us yell. Some of us just close it down and don't say anything. We all react differently, but we all behave in some way. And we want to talk about that. So let me give you an example, though, because we saw Jesus was angry too, right? So let's unpack that with Jesus. I would suggest that Jesus had a right anger in this situation. So most of the time we don't see Jesus becoming angry, and this is what I love about the Gospels, is that we were reminded that Jesus was also a human being. And so Jesus had a belief. His belief was that God's house, the temple, is to be a place of prayer. And when he went there, he witnessed and he thought to himself, so that was his belief. His thought was, there are people here, the money changers, and they're using God's house not for prayer, but to make a profit or to make money. And so that was the thought, the evaluation of what they were doing in Jesus' mind. So Jesus becomes angry about that. So there's the belief, there's the thought. His emotional reaction is anger about this. And so his action was, what did he do? He turned over the tables. He drove out the money changers. Now I want to suggest to you that there's a difference between selfish anger and right anger, rightly placed anger, because in Jesus' mind, he was thinking about God and God's house, and he was also thinking about other people. So it was part of his compassion for other people that led him to justice. Does that make sense? And there are times we have just reasons to be angry or right reasons to be angry, but it wasn't about him. Does that make sense? It was about others and it was about God. A lot of time, sometimes our anger is rightly placed in that way. So not all anger is that way. And we always have to think, okay, if I am angry and I'm rightly angry, I've got to think about what are the actions and behaviors that are the best response to that. And so, he didn't go hit anybody. He didn't go hurt anybody and those types of things. So his actions may have been appropriate for his anger. Now, but I want to talk today that most of our anger, and suggest that most of our anger and frustration is really ours. And it's about us, and it's often self-centered anger. So how do we move from being people who are angry and frustrated and kind of centered on our own expectations to being people of peace? How do we make that shift from people who are just angry? I actually know people, I don't know if you know people, I actually know people who I think like being angry. They just are pervasively angry all the time. And so I don't think I think somehow they've become that way. And so how do we then become people of peace? So let's unpack that this morning. So if we can use the same pattern of belief, thought, emotion, and action. So let's talk about the Psalm 37 this morning. The psalmist believed something different. So he was looking at all the evil in the world and the wicked people and the things that could make him angry. You could list those out, politicians or whoever we are, or other people that drive around us, or whatever it is that frustrates us in life. These people that we would say are wicked, that are just making life miserable for me and for everybody else. But the psalmist says, I'm not going to do that. So he has a belief here that's going on. And his belief is this. His belief is God is ultimately in control. Did you hear that in the psalm? I'm going to trust God. I'm going to entrust these people to God, these other situations to God, and I'm going to have a belief. My belief is that God ultimately is in control. And the one thing I've learned in a very short period of time is that there are just situations I can't change. I can't change that there's going to be traffic on my way to work in the morning, can I? Can I change that? I can't change that. Can I change the way the other people and drivers around me are going to act as they're in their cars? Do I have any control over that? I don't. And yet I'm getting frustrated. I get angry and frustrated because of things I can't change or control. Yet the psalmist is saying there are things in life that we just need to trust God with, that God is in control. That even though I can't change people's hearts or minds or thoughts or behaviors, God ultimately can. And the psalmist regularly says to wait patiently for God's justice, to wait patiently for God's work to be done in somebody's life. And who knows, God may be at work in somebody's life there in a way that that God wants to be. You know, a great example of this is a steward on a train. Much like a flight attendant, a steward's job, and many years ago, this doesn't happen anymore, was to actually go and serve the people in the seats. And so one particular steward on the train was going, and he was taking coffee to a customer, a passenger, and as he took the coffee to the passenger evaluated the coffee, and it wasn't what the passenger expected. It wasn't hot enough, it didn't have the right cream, where was the sugar, and so for 5 minutes, he just laid into this steward about how bad the service was and what a horrible thing, and he wanted to get new coffee and yada, yada, yada. How many people here have ever worked in the food industry or waiters or waitress? And have you ever experienced a customer that's just been rude and been upset about something that you did? And so the steward there, was very polite and responded very politely, and then he got back in the kitchen. And so what do you think happened in the kitchen? When they get back to the kitchen car, all the other stewards are hanging around. I can't believe that guy reamed you out, let's spit in his coffee, and you think all those things, and they want to get even with him and everything, and they're like, why didn't you just let that guy have it? And he says, well, what's the point? And they're like, well, if I were you, I would have just laid into that guy, given him a taste of his own medicine, and they're all like, get even with him. And the steward's response was this. He said, I figure this poor guy's got to put up with himself every day of his life. I can at least handle it for 5 minutes. He was like, this guy, he's angry all the time. He's just not going to be happy. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm not in control of his anger. I'm not going to own that. He started to say, so he had a different perspective. And he said, that's his problem, not my problem. God can change his heart, but I can't. I'm not going to change his heart. And so his reaction was based in a larger perspective about that. Instead of getting angry, he just said, hey, I'm not going to carry that around with me. I'm not going to let that ruin my day. I'm not going to let somebody else's problems be my problems. And partly that's the belief that God is ultimately in control. It gives us a different perspective. The other thing the psalmist repeats several times is this phrase, do not fret. He said that, the psalmist said that several times, do not fret. And that's about our thought process. Because when we start to stew about something, isn't that fretting? Isn't that what we do? We kind of run it over in our minds, and we think about the things we should have said, and we think about the things we could have done in that situation or with that person, and so we fret about it. We just stew about it. And that stewing and that fretting just kind of takes over in our minds and our thoughts. And so we then become, in a sense, victims or trapped into our own anger about the situation and our unmet expectations. It's interesting because James gives us some advice here. James 1:19 says this, you must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. What happens to us when we take the time to listen instead of become angry? What does that what does that change in us and in the situation when we stop, take a breath, and actually listen and try and understand the other person or about the situation? When we do that, we're being patient. When we do that, we're changing our thoughts about the situation. When we're quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. So instead of, because I don't know about you, but typically when we're fretting and thinking about we're thinking about what's the next arrow I can zing at this person or zing at this situation. We're often formulating in our minds what's the next thing I'm going to say to prove my point or to get even or to whatever it is, rather than stepping back and say, okay, let me understand the situation better. Maybe there's something I'm assuming here about my expectation that I need to think about rather than just get angry about. So I actually have some control over whether or not I get angry about the situation. And so we can become so consumed with fretting that we forget to listen. So that's a thought process. The other thing that the psalmist says is refrain from anger and wrath, the emotion. The psalmist is saying, let go of that emotion. Do not let that emotion get hold of you. Don't let it take over your heart and your mind. And so the psalmist is saying that. You know, I was working with teenagers, and if you've ever worked with teenagers or had teenagers, I mean, it's just a very peaceful journey, isn't it? So I worked with teenagers, and I came to church one night as a youth pastor, and two of the young men were on the roof of the church throwing rocks off the roof at cars and passerbys as they were going by the, not big rocks, but, little rocks, but still they didn't feel good, and they put dings in cars. And so they were up on the roof, and I caught them up there. I had to climb up on the roof. Back in my younger days, I could do that, and I dragged them down off the roof, and, I said, look, you're not staying around for youth group. You're going home tonight. I'm calling your parents. You're out of here. And I was a little frustrated with their behavior. And so I said to them, so I'm going to call your parents. So I called the parents, and one parent came and got one of the young men. And the other young man I couldn't get a hold of his parents. I finally got to talk to his older sister, who then finally came and got him and took him home. And I thought, I really need to talk to parents about this. I think as a parent, I'd want to know what's going on and why my child was behaving this way. And so I tried a couple more times that week, and I could not get either of the parents on the phone. Finally, I got the sister on the phone, who then got the mom on the phone for me. And I began to talk to the mom, and I was just getting ready to, launch into my reasons of why her young person should be behaving this way. And she began to unpack and tell me what was going on in the house. And I just stopped and I listened. And as I listened, I began to unpack, and I began to hear about a family that was just in turmoil, and it was falling apart, and I began to understand why this young man was acting out, and I began to understand the stress that was in the household and the frustrations in the family and all the things that were going on, and I realized now why she couldn't come to the phone, and so as I listened, my emotions about this young man changed, is what I'm saying. As I listened and understood the context of the situation, and I dropped all my assumptions about it, I began to understand that my anger and my frustration actually began to be replaced with compassion. And so actually after that phone call, I had more compassion for this young man than anger after that. And that's how our emotions shift when we will think about things differently, so that our thoughts actually lead to our emotions. And then if we'll take the time to listen, and we take the time, that we will refrain from anger, and our emotions will shift to a different place if we'll take the time to do that. And then when we're in that place, how much easier do you think it was for me to forgive that young man at that point because of that? So that's an action. When we forgive somebody, that's our action. That's an action that Christ calls us to, God calls us to. So think about that. You think it was easier for me to forgive or harder for me to forgive? It was easier, wasn't it? See, that's the power of listening. That's the power of taking the time to step back and refrain from anger and stop fretting. And when we do that, and we really try and understand the situation and the others involved in the context, we begin to change and not carry around anger anymore. And ultimately, the action we want to get to is forgiveness, right? Maybe we need to forgive ourselves. Maybe there's someone else we need to forgive. Maybe we need to forgive God. Maybe we're angry about life, and we're blaming God. And really, God has nothing to do with it. And sometimes maybe we need to just forgive God and forgive others. St. Augustine, I'm going to thank Van Beal for this quote this morning, because I asked him, we had a little discussion at our breakfast meeting, and I said, do you have any, now that you're angry, could you help me out with the sermon? And so he emailed me this quote, and it actually comes from St. Augustine. It says this: resentment is like taking poison and hoping the other person dies. Resentment is like taking poison and hoping the other person dies. I want to unpack this system one more time, but I want to take us to the cross. Jesus was hanging on the cross. He had been beaten, tortured, humiliated, stripped of his clothes. They gambled for his clothes. They put a crown of thorns on him. They put a sign over his head mocking him, King of the Jews. He was crucified and put in public view. He had been nailed to a cross. We're not talking countertops here, folks. We're not talking stuck in traffic. We're not talking about some unmet expectation that we have about life. We're talking about crucifixion. If anybody had a right to be angry, I think Jesus did. And yet his words on the cross were this: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You see, Jesus had a belief that his crucifixion had a greater purpose, and he believed he was doing this for all of humanity. He had a thought to himself, they don't understand what's going on. They don't understand what's happening. They don't understand what they're doing. His emotion was compassion for us and for the people there that didn't understand. And his action was forgiveness. Amen.